My friends, welcome to episode number 2 with Nicholas Seedsman. This is the second time that Nick, a dear friend of mine, is on my YouTube channel. For those of you who don't know, Nick is a former SAS operator with the Australian SAS, or SASR apparently to be more exact. He did many tours of Afghanistan, spent time in the Navy when he was young before joining the SAS. And in this podcast, we cover some really interesting topics. In the last interview, we spoke about the selection process of the SAS, and we spoke about kind of what drove him to want to do something so extreme and unique. But in this podcast, quite interesting actually, quite deep this interview, we speak about the closest he ever came to death, the only time ever where he kind of wrote a love letter, so to speak, or a love text message to his family during one particular operation, and he goes into detail with that operation. We spoke about ayahuasca, spiritual kind of enlightenment, and his time after the SAS. And most importantly, towards the end of the episode, we speak about Nick finding God, Jesus, and quite an interesting story, and there's a few deep moments there. So I hope you enjoy it. Please go ahead and I guess like the video, subscribe to my channel if you want more videos like this. I do have some in the works, and share it with your loved ones, share it with your friends if you find it interesting. Thank you guys. See ya. All right, we're back. Part 2 with Nicholas Seedsman. How are you, my friend?
Good, mate. How you doing?
Good, mate. It's been a little while. That first video we did had a pretty epic response. It didn't do much for the first couple of months, and then all of a sudden we had this influx of views, and people had questions and comments, and people were super curious. And the most frequent question, actually the most frequent question by everybody was your accent. People were like thrown off. Every other comment was like, where is this guy from? What's with the accent? He's throwing me off. Some people loved it. Some people hated it. Whatever. We don't mind. But tell us about the accent. What happened?
There's a I like that when you say some people loved it, some people hate it. There's this thing in the island language off the coast of Australia, or let's say Papua New Guinea. It's its own nation, right? But it was a territory of Australia. So technically Australia was invaded in World War II heavily. But it used to be a territory, and they have like this language called Tokpisin, and it's kind of like the Caribbean island language where they clash French, they clash like Dutch, they clash English and German, and they just kind of like mix it all together into this mutt of a language. It doesn't really make sense to anyone else. But it's called Tokpisin, and we had to study it on selection, because for every selection they give you a language to study, and then they like later on, near the end they'll ask you to start speaking in it to some degree. It's like kind of leaving you to study at your own pace, and then just randomly asking you later. But anyway, my response to that would be like, problem belong you. it's like we used to say it all the time in the unit. It's like whenever someone would have like, well, especially in our training cycle, because we all studied the same language, because we then went and did our jungle training or our like patrol training in Papua New Guinea, so it became necessary to speak to the locals and the villagers and whatnot. But anyway, problem belong you, bud. Whoever's got a problem with the accent, but
whoever that is, absolutely.
Whoever they are, good luck with that. So I've got I obviously, if you track my profile or my Instagram online, which is where I've just basically dumped all my center of gravity for social connection and like a threshold to the public, where if they want to reach out to me and so on, that they can. And I don't care about LinkedIn, and I don't need extra social media, and I don't need to circle jerk my fucking self, like give myself a pat on the back and wank myself off. It's a little bit too much, but because of the acting, which you'll see on that social media that I took up, and my first film just came out. It's on Apple TV, and then once it's had its film period there, once it's had its rent period, I would say there or one of the other streaming services, get the bidding rights for that. And then after that, it'll be on Paramount Plus. It's owned by Paramount Pictures. But that was a big one for me. But what I'm getting to is here, my accent I have to every single day practice the American accent, because I have to speak general American as an accent. I also have to practice British now because I practice at least, I'll speak at least 1 to 3 other languages a day, either and read and write as well. So in the end of each day, I've read and write most of them, and I'm switching out loud between them as well. And my ability to switch between those two is fine, but I actually do keep a little bit of American around when I'm talking to Americans, because if you've spent a lot of business in America or time in America, you get quite sick of repeating yourself. If people going,
Yeah, like asking for water.
yeah,
You know,
water. I just get water.
us Aussies, I remember living in Canada and saying, "I want a water," and they're like, "What's that?
They have
What
no
is
idea.
that?"
None.
Yeah,
They won't get it. You could say it 3 times, 4 times at a restaurant. You could sit there and you could just keep repeating yourself, and you could be somewhere nice, and they're so polite about it because they're really banking on you tipping them, so their service is going to be good, and they'll be like, "I'm so sorry, sir. I don't know what you're saying," and they'll like, I'm so, and they'll be like really genuinely apologetic. That was when I took some respite from the unit, cashed out on my leave and long service leave, and went and lived in Miami for a little bit
Mhm.
for months, in 2014, until about, like, I think January, February 15. And that was one of the things. Even my friends at the table, the girl that was my girlfriend, and this American couple that I was dear friends with, um, they had no idea what I was asking for. So no one at the table could help me. No one, the waitress couldn't help me. No one at the table could help me. And I didn't know there was something wrong with it because I'm so used to just grab a bottle of water or fill up a bottle of water, and I don't need to care. But that was one thing. The other thing was taxi drivers. They had no idea what I was saying. And they were like Haitian or whatever in Miami.
Mm.
Later on, it actually became more advantageous just to speak to everyone in Spanish in Miami in the service industry. So I'd do that. But I didn't know Spanish at the time. I knew how to read and write it pretty well. I taught myself Spanish to read and write in Afghan on my last trip. And it was just so much easier to start speaking some American words around them. And then with the accent training and interacting with Americans all day for a lot of business, it actually makes them feel a bit more comfortable with me. And it's more continuative if there is no, "Hey, what are you saying? What was that? Sorry, what was that? Can you explain that? What are you asking for?" So not only did I remove, like in Miami, I learned to remove a lot of the edginess of the Australian um, accent from repeating myself. I'm on the other side of America in probably the Latin capital of the world, Spanish capital of the world, which is Miami. And colloquial, I removed as well. So I didn't say all these random idioms and slangs and all this stuff, and people just constantly second guessing what I'm saying, or like I could ask for take me to 13th Street, and I could bank on being taken to 3rd Street or 14th Street, and bank on being taken. 14th Street was what I was on, and I got taken to 4th Street every time. I just tell them, "Hey, stop! I'm jumping out here." That's because, like, as I passed it, that was the only way, because they just never were going to get it, and I couldn't change my accent.
What I've realized after many, many years of being a health practitioner and working with people is it's not about how you sound or what you are trying to communicate. It's all about what the other person comprehends. So even if you're speaking like the best English and they don't understand it, then you need to adjust. And it's actually a
Yep.
really good skill. Like for us as practitioners, we need to be able to communicate the same message to somebody that's a CEO of a company and somebody that's a general worker and somebody that's has a really high level of education and somebody who doesn't have any education, somebody whose English is a second language and somebody who has perfect English. We have to be able to communicate the same
Mm.
message. And so it's actually a very good skill. Like this is something that I talk to a lot of salespeople about or young guys. I say, hey, you need to adjust the way you speak for the person on the other side so they can actually understand you. Or like when I'm teaching jiu-jitsu, for example, one guy will get it the first time and the other guy I have to maybe communicate it in a different way and word it differently. So I think teaching, um, is a really good way. But anyway, all this to say is like the reason why you've developed an accent is ultimately because the people on the other side will understand you better. It's more efficient.
100%. Comes down to communication. I had this random guy I did this training with in the army, and did, we were digging a hole for like 2 weeks, and he was a corporal at the time, and this was a training course to B1, so he was like ahead of the game. He was really competent guy, and he said something on the radio one day, and it was a lot of communication going back and forth. It wasn't just a simple radio chatter kind of conversation. And at the end, he was like, "Was it perfect? No. Did it have to be? No. The objective of picking up this device isn't saying the perfect language, right? The objective is to get your message communicated across, confirm that they understand the message of which you've communicated." And it was a really great lesson for everything, because that's come up in a whole bunch of business books since then, of people the head of big corporate empires, and they just speak in a really simple, general communication to everyone. They don't try to impress people with fancy words like, a rich man doesn't have to tell you he's rich, right? Like the competent CEO put in those positions is capable of communicating to everyone unanimously across their organization. And I found that in the unit as well. Like, by comparison, I remember sometimes you get some officers external that come in and they start speaking in like to kind of stroke their own ego a little bit. And you're like, what are you doing, man? It's more important here that everyone understands exactly what's going on. So when the commanding officer would speak to everyone, he would do it in a way where it was language that every single person in the room could understand. And I might introduce one new word that is that by context, the way a child makes sense of conversation, everyone in that room will understand as I repeat it several times, that particular word and what I want that word to mean regarding our organization. Like fidelity. I remember fidelity coming up for the first time, and I'm like, not really sure, but they gave significant context as it was repeated multiple times in different scenarios in the unit. And then all of a sudden we're using fidelity to describe the way we carry out operations.
Before we get into the grunt of this interview or podcast, let's call it, I took note of some comments that I thought like, wow, this is epic. I can't believe these people found this interview, but I'm going to read them out to you because they're pretty epic. Like, some guys said, best podcast I've seen in years. Somebody else said, amazing and moving interview. Someone else said, this was such an outstanding interview. Thank you to you both. I'd love to see Nicholas Seedsman on some American podcast, like the Jocko Willink Show and the Sean Ryan podcast, Danger Close and Jack Carr. Guys, if you want to put, I'm pretty sure you can put requests through with those people. So if you feel like it, put it through. But, many people complimented on the interview. There was a couple that really stood out to me. One guy said, I remember Nick from 2008 to 2009. It was pissing down rain one afternoon. Everyone was holed up inside and skeeving from any work. I look outside and there he is, smashing out burpees nonstop. That's when we all knew he'd go far. I don't know who this was, but that's a pretty epic little story. And then somebody else said, I'm pretty sure I was the acting platoon sergeant when a young Nick was sent to me as part of a sister company. Andrew George was our OC, and I sat down with Andy to discuss how impressed I was with a young fella. From memory, I'm pretty sure I signed his paperwork to allow him to do his own training for the upcoming cadre course. Andy and I said that if that young fella didn't make it, then no one would that year. Deeply proud to see that his warrior heart took him on all the adventures he sought. Proud Aussie veteran. How does that make you feel?
Yeah, it was good, obviously. To be seen back then. It's very interesting because if people think you're doing well or you are doing well in a capacity, the army, people won't tell you. It's not really something that we share. So it's interesting to find out about it like years later. It's a male thing, actually. Males, like, traditionally, I think, don't share positive things necessarily with each other. It's kind of like more the army. You'll find out if you're doing something bad, something wrong. Which was cool because really that helps foster what you need, right? Like I was a fucking savage when I was a young man. I still am in a different way now, different pursuits and energy. But I was a savage. Like I knew I was a savage too, but I didn't give myself any compliments or internal thought or dialogue to support that. I just did. I remember I didn't even have a training date for the cadre, which is the selection course for the SAS. And I was training 5 to 7 times a day. And I mean, not like one of those sessions that guy's talking about, what that guy's talking about me in the rain, that might not even have counted as one of those sessions. That might have just been like, well, let's go rough myself up a bit and go outside and do a couple hundred burpees or something in the rain. Or I remember I used to do the 3.2 with the webbing, all the equipment and the rifle and whatnot in uniform and camouflage. And I'd if there was rain, I'd be like, oh, perfect opportunity. Like if I'd rode to work, I didn't stop because I was saturated in the rain. I just ride in the rain. It was up and down mountains for 10 Ks. It also had its other benefits, right? Because I was riding on highways a lot. So it was a lot of intricate traffic that I had to cross, constantly zigzagging. So it also taught me to, even though it's rain and I'm saturated and I'm exhausted, because this is the 5th session plus all the army stuff I've been doing that day, it would also teach me to keep immense situational awareness so I didn't die. But how does it make me feel now? It's definitely, it's cool. It's good to see that there's memories of that and me, and that's something that was so normal to me. I wasn't doing it for a show that I couldn't even tell you when that was exactly.
Yeah.
Obviously the time period is kind of, within a several month window, and that just based on some of the word choices that we used in that.
Yeah. Basic question. This is more so for me because I didn't know there was a difference. What's the difference between SAS and SASR?
So SAS is, well, here's the thing, there's 22 SAS, which is the British. And there's SASR, which is Australian. And then there's NZSAS, which is the New Zealand. And then there was, and I don't know what acronym they had, but there was Rhodesian SAS before it became Zimbabwe, and that unit dismantled, along with whatever they wanted to dismantle in that nation thereafter. So I guess those guys don't exist anymore, other than their history. So that's the difference, right? And I'll break it down for you. So what happened in World War II? Because I sent this to another guy the other day who's in Ukraine, a press journalist over there, a mate of mine who made an infinite amount of money in crypto, but not fell on it kind of strategically, and still has a crypto trading platform, so he doesn't really have to ever worry about money ever again. Nice. Nor his probably great grandchildren or anything. And he's a really good guy, so he uses his money now for adventure. So we constantly plan to do reckless adventures together. And that's what he does. He's now crossing as a press into Russia with the Ukrainian forces. So he's gets himself into the tip of the spear, and he goes and takes photos of in the middle of protests, and I'm in Georgia now, the country, and he was here, and they have huge protests against Russia here because the government's now pro-Russian. You can remember just over 10 years ago, they were invaded randomly by Russia for not having a pro-Russian government. So the government's kind of Russia pro, but the people are we got invaded, we hate the Russians. So he was here covering journalism and whatnot. Now, he was asking me a whole bunch of stuff about warfare and all these things, and understanding special operations forces and whatnot. And I had to break it down for him because he's, trying to explain the different tier system that the Americans kind of created, because the Americans have 16,000 special operations personnel, which kind of get lost in the sauce a bit. So they broke it down into Tier 3, which is, like their Green Berets and the assets assigned to that organization, and their capabilities and whatnot. And then they said, all right, cool, Tier 2. And then they put their like SEALs and Rangers and I think Marine Special Operation Command, which are now called Raiders, which I'll get to in a second. And they put that in there. And then they held a category of like Tier 1, which was, CAG or Delta Force, and then Dev Group, Development Group, Navy Special Warfare Development Group, which was SEAL Team 6. So that was what they did, was they'd created all these other organizations, Max SOV in Vietnam and Green Berets in Vietnam, and I think even the SEALs in Vietnam as well, by the end of it. And basically the reason for that is they're like, oh, we need these forces that the Commonwealth have. Because we developed it in World War II. We developed like the British commandos for like really intense kinetic warfare, and the Australian commandos at the same time, because you remember we're extremely tightly knit, right? And then that's when the British had come up with the SAS in North Africa, which completely changed warfare more or less forever. You got to remember that we don't give enough credit. We don't want to the Germans. The SS paratrooper is Otto Schwarze, and it comes out in the book of the guy who talks about him in the book of the McRaven, the guy who founded SEAL Team 6, which I'll get to again in a sec. This paratrooper created these special operations missions, and some of them, the first one was the reason the Germans were able to actually successfully invade France and take the whole French nation, in like going through the Ardennes forest, Ardennes forest or something like that. So they created, the British took that audacity, and David Sterling created the SAS, but simultaneously this guy in Australia created Z Special, like within a several month period thereafter, right? And this is when the SAS weren't really known, but it was, how do we take this large group operation of the British and commandos, and Australian had their commandos as well, and how do we take a smaller team that are way more rogue, leaning into the local population to fight with them? And this is all of it, the Germans, Australians, everyone are probably probably copying and pasting to some degree Lawrence of Arabia from World War One, which pretty much single-handedly won the entire, not single-handedly, but pretty damn close, won the entire Middle Eastern mission against the Ottomans and the Germans in World War One. He just rogue united all these tribes and incited this war, that really didn't need any manpower and generally just some weapons from the Commonwealth or the Allies. So anyway, we created at the same time the Z Special, and we did the most recklessly awesome missions around the Pacific, and we had the Pacific, and then you had the SAS in operating in North Africa, and then eventually that turned into the Mediterranean as a whole, and then eventually ran into France. And by then, as I understand it, that the Z Force had managed to get themselves into France as well, by the end. But you'd have to check the history on that. I'm a little bit hazy on it, but it's anyway. So we created these different tiers kind of back then, even though we didn't really know what we're getting into the guts of. So I should say, the Commonwealth didn't really know what they were getting into the guts of doing this. But they knew it was like the David Sterling prototype of just who dares wins, reckless audacity and tenacity. They got immense results, significant results. Like, imagine shooting more planes than the entire, in North Africa than the entire. It was like maybe double the amount of planes than the British Air Force, right? It's a pretty solid win. And we were sinking more ships than the Commonwealth were, Japanese ships in the Commonwealth were in the Pacific, sinking.
How many men
your manpower
are we talking about?
They'd be doing like jobs of, there'd be less than less than 10, but probably like less than 5 on various missions, and using local Indigenous populations to do the fighting with them. So that's where the Americans eventually came out with special forces to do that. And then that's when they came out with this audacious Max Sov V, which is almost definitely replicated off the British, off the Australian and the New Zealand SAS, who were definitely the most pointy tip of the spear special operations units in Vietnam. So they were kind of creating something like that. And then so they kind of created this. They created the SEALs. They created this Max Sov V to probably be a little bit more, like, we're talking ridiculously audacious. And the only time I think the Americans had anything before that was in World War II, where they had the Marine Raiders. And I really just think that these were a handful of guys that were savages on the battlefield, that they were just like, you're going to probably die going into Guadalcanal, this island first. Yeah, like dead serious. Like, but who's absolutely down to go take the fight to the Japanese? Because at this point, the Japanese no one had stood up to them and succeeded in anything that could be measured as a success. Like, everyone was just getting smoked. So they went in and sort of paved the way for a bit of an invasion of the Marines, and just caused absolute mayhem by destroying fuel supplies and all this stuff. And that's where later on they created Marine Recon, which was kind of based off that. Then they created, MARSOC, Marine Special Operations Command. And then now they're just like, well, fuck, let's pay the ode back to these guys who founded this unit. And that's where Max Sov V. So then after World War II, Australia rebranded, and the British rebranded just to SAS. So the British just found the word SAS, but we founded the same special operations units and divided up the world at the same time. And there's only really one statue I've ever seen, and we went to it on our training cycle. Like, our commanders took us out like mid our 18-month training, where we're doing where we're learning how to raid ships, sea vessels, etc. And in like close quarter battle and what that looks like. And they took us out to get just middle of the week shit-faced, like encouragingly shit-faced, until like 4 a.m. And we thought, this is a good rowdiness with our trainers. And then it's like, all right, guys, you're not going to sleep. Go get all your equipment. Put your uniform on, your boots on, everything, weighted, shit, whatever. And then they proceeded to take us to the water, the cold water in the ocean off this island. And on the way, they stopped at the only known memorial site I've ever heard of or seen for a Z special, on the naval base. And he gave us, this one older dude, Peter Cape, gave us this epic speech about it, about these guys paving the way, the savages and the sacrifices they made, so that Australia could and we could not lose the war, but also, like, they're the foundations of our unit. Do not forget them. Different name, but they are the unit. The unit didn't start in the 50s. The unit started here in like 41 or 40 or whatever it was. So, and then they worked us to death in a PT session in the water. Like, there's been only a few times in my life I thought I was going to drown, and they were all when I was in special operations or special operations selection. And that was one of them. That was day was like, I was still drunk, wasn't getting sober any time quicker, but my body was trying to dump it all the toxins. But they worked us to death and did it with us, but like worked us to death, man. Like, anyway, it was pretty intense. But that's the difference in between 22 SAS and SASR and New Zealand SAS.
Makes sense. The drinking culture part, I somewhat understand, but I don't also understand at the same time. Like, I get being out in Afghanistan and needing to deal with stress and, camaraderie and kind of drinking with your buddies to do all that. But I also, from like a physical perspective, I'm like, isn't it a burden on your performance? What's with the drinking culture? Why so much alcohol?
It's like, think of it as like the Vikings in a sense, right? Although I don't I don't think that I think the things we consume now have so much more toxins in them than what used to be drank. Like you gotta remember in the medieval times, they were drinking mead instead of water. So they were pretty much drinking this most of the day because they knew it had killed all the bacteria in the water. And they were starting to get population issues and animals living with people and people throwing shit in the streets. And it was the only way to not get poisoned was to drink mead. And I think like there's also other cultures were doing like really weak wines and stuff like that because the alcohol would kill the bacteria. So it was, but so it's not like it's unheard of, right, in these cultures. And what I think it is the only output of which the military has given us to decompress. Like the other thing is that the Vikings were doing medicines. The whole North and South America were doing indigenous medicines. The whole Mediterranean were doing their medicines. They were doing ergot. Ergot was so common. Like there's a whole book about it. And then they go to the Vatican and they go to Spain. They go over and they're swabbing all these cauldrons and they're finding it all throughout Greek colonies and third party colonies derived from the Greeks. And every cauldron swabbed and they had the same thing. They had the same ceremonial psychedelic, right? Alcohol, once the Catholic Church kind of killed that, has become the only condoned medicine of choice to allow people to release the tension that has been built up, running in especially in the British Empire. Like guys are encouraged to share nothing, show no emotion, show no physical torment, just like this British reservation of holding yourself together. That escalated to such a degree that that's the only way to decompress. And now the military have got like, they're kind of changing their drug policy. Like I talked to someone the other day, I'm like, can you guys do mushrooms? I'm like, if you were to go to a proper clinical environment and do mushrooms or psilocybin in there, or you're able to do the MDMA ceremony in there, or you're able to, or whatever clinical ceremony, right, to work on your past, because, it had seemed logical to do this before it comes up later on after a bunch of war and becomes a bit of a snowballed shit show. I'm like, could you do them? They're like, well, yeah, you can go do them in the clinical environments, but they're still illegal to the defense. I'm like, which only leaves you with bludgeoning alcohol. Yeah. So it's like, until you give these guys an alternate option, and let me tell you now, the alternate options that I've done an infinite amount of ayahuasca. I've done a boga, which is the African version, and psilocybin a lot. I've done the ketamine. I do ketamine meditations now, prescription from a doctor. Ketamine meditation is becoming common in America to do. They call it therapy, self-therapy, but I just sit there and I go through a meditation for an hour. I'm infinitely better as a result of it. Not maybe, and it allowed me to actually categorize my, let's say, medicines and drugs, right? The medicines, am I a better person the next day? And the answer is with the ones I just mentioned. The MDMA you'd want to do in a ceremony, not too often because it depletes serotonin, but it's really good for people who have huge emotional limitations because it forces you to open your hearts and feel things, like allow yourself to feel. But the ketamine, the doing that as a ceremony, or doing the MDMA as a ceremony, or also say in a clinical environment, the ayahuasca, infinitely. None of these are addictive, by the way. Like when you've done them and you've stopped, you're kind of like, I'm good. Like I don't need to go back into that realm for a little bit. I've had my fill. And you might even be able to put in there of microdosing or whatever, LSD. And you don't have to take these in a huge amount. You can take them in microdoses, right? Like I know people that microdose LSD to optimize their brain and their mind each day and like their thoughts, and they fire new like pathways in their brain that they didn't otherwise fire, which allows them to perform better at whatever they're creatively doing. So I was able to categorize it pretty simply for myself now. What makes which compound makes me a better person the next day, and which one makes me a worse person the next day. And it's pretty fucking obvious. Like, tell me someone who's on meth that looks like a better person the next day, someone on crack, someone on cocaine that's a better person the next day. They'll tell you first up that they haven't. They're also now borderline addictive. Like, they'll ruin several days worth. And then alcohol sits in the middle, but to be honest, the way people use it, mostly on the definitely not a better person the next day. Depleted, exhausted, etc. Right? However, in certain environments, I will argue that at a wedding where everyone's on that same energy wavelength, that participating in that is not a terrible thing, right? Like,
Yeah, absolutely.
But now from my perspective, I've switched to any alternate medicine where I might do a little bit of psilocybin, whether it's a microdose or a medium dose, and go out socially. I might do the prescription ketamine. I might do microdose LSD or whatever, and I barely drink when I go out, and I have the best time. I have a great laugh. I have so much fun. I'm closer to homeostasis. I feel better then. I sleep perfectly, and I wake up a better person the next day, and I'm more capable of running that continuum of achieving the things in my life every single day that I want to achieve, and doing everything I want on that day as a choice, rather than I'm a depleted, exhausted person.
Yeah. Does it help you manage the savage inside of you? The reason I ask is, you grow up as a savage. You obviously have to be a savage to be in the unit, and then you leave the unit and you end up in civilian life. Has there ever been times where, I guess, the anger or your emotions or the savagery comes out where you're like, man, this person or this instance, or I could, does that ever happen to you?
I've always been pretty calm and collected. Sorry, go on.
Because I know it happens to fighters. Like, a lot of fighters, they retire from fighting, but they know what they're capable of. And sometimes that kind of pride and that anger is still there. And if in the wrong setting with enough
Yeah.
disrespect or something, they might just snap.
Yeah, I mean, the interesting thing about the military is, like, you're not encouraged to pick fights. In fact, disencouraged to start a fight because of the consequences of that for administration for the units, the organizations. And so you kind of really, really clearly shunned away from that. You have a bigger world responsibility, right? Especially in the unit. Like, you're a strategic asset of the Australian government. So it's like the accountability for you and the amount of money that's being poured into you is like, you can be sent wherever at a moment's notice the next morning or whatnot. So if you've got a court trial or any bullshit like that, they'll just kick you out of the unit. They're like, well, you're no use to us because when do we know you're going to do this next fuckery? So there's that from a physical point of view, but we're also, the way we operate, like, is emotionless, like, honed focus and centeredness on the battlefield, on conflict in a gunfight, in any circumstance. It's not like reckless emotion, like a fight, like snapping and whatnot. That'll probably get you killed pretty quick. So there's two different. There's a fighter and there's the warrior per se, and the warrior is like extremely honed and nuanced about the way that they react to things. I would say when you get out and you don't have that, yeah, there is, but I think that savage in the gym and all that sort of stuff is where you can, and fight training and whatnot is where you can kind of relinquish that. I do have a bit of a fear, a little, not a fear, but like kind of like a fear of somebody just deciding one day that they don't like me and pushing those buttons. Yeah, I mean and it might, to be honest. And there's probably a bit of pent up, like, violence that wants to come out in some sense from that, and it does concern me because it's like, I'll probably lose it, and within control, but voluntarily lose it. Like, yeah, this this is kind of my line. Thanks for, for coming out tonight, guys, but I'm about to ruin everyone's good time.
Yeah.
Mostly this person. And so there's that element there that can create a little bit of concern, but for the most part, it's like, it's very, very calm and collected under wraps. I think the savage is more of like, you can show up in other places of life in savagery, right? And it's like the way you bring your energy to this world and what you do with your hands. Like, the way you incite inspiration into yourself in the pursuits of what you do with those hands as well. And it's like, it's the same sort of energy. It's just reorientated. And I got to be honest, like, I haven't felt the courage intensity that I felt on a battlefield until I did ayahuasca. And you're going to take more because you're doing work. You're there to work, right? You're there like to. This isn't just like, oh, this is a fun hangout. If you thought it was going to be a fun hangout, you're about to be fucked up with some truths pretty quick. But I would use that to like going in and taking a second cup, knowing that you need to break through to the next level and you need to lose your fear about what might happen to you doing that. And it's like that there was the only time I've ever been able to find that next level, that courage that you would otherwise find on in a gunfight. Yeah.
Are there any things that you do when you're out in public or out at a bar or a restaurant or anywhere really that either consciously or subconsciously that you do as a way to keep yourself safe? Like, for example, as a small example, like growing up, my dad always used to say to me, because my dad's ex-military, and he used to say, when you're in a restaurant, when you're in a bar, wherever you are, sit with your back on the wall, see the room, know where the exits are. When you walk into somewhere, just keep an eye on where the exits are. If you're holding a drink, hold it in your left hand so that your right hand's free. Simple, basic things that he like drilled into me growing up that I still subconsciously will do now. Not because I'm paranoid. I wouldn't call it like paranoia or fear, but it's just healthy perception of my environment, because the best self-defense is not to be in the situation. I don't want to get involved. I don't want I don't want you close enough to be able for me to actually have to put hands on you. I'd rather just remove myself and remove whoever I'm with from the situation. But is there anything that you do from the unit that you've picked up on consciously or subconsciously that you go, that keeps you safe? Because you've been to Colombia, Georgia, you've traveled the world. Obviously there are some places that are unfamiliar and maybe not as safe as others. What do you do?
Yeah, for the most part, like, it depends who I'm with, right? If the person I'm with is one of the guys that who's kind of got your back and they have some self-awareness themselves, then I have no problem with like that interlocking art. Like, you think in the military everyone would sit down and face outwards. Now, big units they do, but in our small units we'd actually face right shoulder in or face inwards to a degree, so you can see the faces of each person, you can see their reaction to what they're seeing, so you kind of know what's going on behind you without seeing it. And you can see all the peripheral over your shoulder, so you get 360-degree view of the whole surrounding. You also see those reactions and anticipate things, and you can see that in their faces as well when you sit with your friends that have for sure got an alertness about them. So as long as they have their back towards the wall, then yeah, I try to put my back towards the wall. And it's the other side of it is like, I'm pretty chill and peaceful with my energy, right? And I say that with just like not like the nice guy that's just giving everything up. No, it's like I'm just centered, right? And I'm really calm. But I will still try to sit with my back towards a wall, especially when I've got a girl there that it's my duty to protect. That's especially if they come to insert random country with me. It's just like, yeah, it's my duty for the welfare of this girl. But for the most part, yeah, I do. Firstly, don't look at a wall. Secondly, it's like, like looking at a wall isn't particularly that interesting. Secondly, I always try to have my back towards one, but not in a way where I'm like worried about my security. There's nervousness about it. Just diligence. just like the way how you do anything is how you do everything. And I will put my back against a wall as part of that. Just like the way I stand, the way I walk the street in a foreign country. Like, I'm not walking around like this guy looking for trouble, but I have a kind of a bit of an energy about my face and just me that's like, oh yeah, don't. Maybe I'll rob the fucking maybe I'll rob the computer engineer.
Yeah,
You know what I mean? Not
100%.
to shit on them,
And
just different
I
job.
think this is very much a men thing. Like I was at a wedding over the weekend, and I had my sister and my wife with me, and 1 a.m. in the morning, we're waiting for a taxi, and everyone's dressed up, and I'm in a tux, and a guy walks past, and he's obviously drunk, and he's looking at me because we're all dressed up. No one else is dressed up on the middle of the street. So he's looking at me, and he sits about a meter away, and then he keeps looking at all of us. Like, I'm with two girls and me. So I just stood up. And I didn't look back at him. I didn't stand up to like make him feel intimidated at all. I just stood up in the way that like, hey, like, I'm here. This is my presence is here. And my wife's like, why are you standing up? I'm like, just standing up. Just feel a bit more comfortable standing up. Because again, like that, and the guy took another look and walked away. It was like, probably not the best target for tonight to pick on. But even just that presence of like standing up, just stand up. Much more dynamic when you're up on your feet. And you kind of let him know, like, hey, I'm up, just
Yeah, I feel that. It's like it's just, or it doesn't, and it doesn't necessarily have to be as overt as standing. It can just be it's the simple energy shift in you that is like, hey, I'm sober, and I'm aware you exist. It's like, and it doesn't escalate in any capacity or create any kind of unnecessary conversation. Because we've got to remember, not only do I not want to have an altercation with that person, I almost certainly don't even want to have a fucking conversation.
yeah.
If that's you, I'm
So
not even interested
just
in
leave
learning about you
yeah.
of any fucking capacity. So it's like I don't want you to interrupt whatever conversation and fun and energy our current circle has. So I'm like not interested in that by any fucking measure. Yeah, I not a part of me wants to know your name.
Yeah, absolutely. I've got a couple of pretty deep questions, but before I get into them, just from like my own curiosity about service, was there ever a time when you were in a particular mission where you were scared that you might die?
Yeah, there was one as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see, what did I say the other day? There had something where it was like I could never remember a time where I'd actually felt fear as fear, not just a ridiculously heightened sense of alertness, which if I wasn't really well trained and honed would have come out as fear in other people. But I did this. I don't know if it was fear. I did this mission. This one that on the last trip to Afghanistan, and the team leader put it together with a local warlord who, they basically gave him police uniform because you have to, these governments have to make him like somewhat
Official.
within the legal official within the legal guidelines. And basically went through this valley to clear this valley, and it was a huge, huge valley and a huge mission. And that day stirred up such a fucking hornet's nest because this valley just been and all the villages in it had been completely taken over by the Taliban. Like it wasn't maybe they were walking around with guns like it was a Tuesday, overtly, right? So we went through with the warlord, his militia, and more police. He just gave them blue shirts for the day, and there was a lot of them, and it was our team of like 5 or 6 dudes and like 100 of them militia, or 80, or probably about 100. And then the other end, we got the commandos inserted as like a blocking force, and they put their snipers and mortar team around and just had obviously a huge concentration that would stay at the other end and for the most part and provide like a blocking overwatch kind of position. Now it was a huge valley, so they couldn't see us for quite a long time until we'd gone right down the valley. And getting inserted on that mission was the only time I ever on this is my 3rd trip to Afghan, ever got my phone out, jumped online to whatever WhatsApp equivalency, which I never turned my phone on because when I was over there, I didn't want to think about the rest of the world. I didn't want to focus. My job focus entirely was here. So I barely even called my family. And I just wrote my brother. I'm like, hey, I love you. Tell my family that I love them. And then sent the message, turn the phone off again for the last 3 weeks or a month that I was over there. And he hadn't got a message the whole time I was there on any of the trips. And then he gets this one. And that was the day that I was like, I was pretty sure I was going to turn to pink mist on a pressure plate, or get shot, or getting a whole bunch of chaos. And even really right up to the end of the mission, it got pretty like that. And the mission went over the course of, got inserted at like 5 a.m. or something like that. And then it went for like, the next day and a half, 2 days or something like that straight. That was the one where I wasn't scared as such, but extremely heightened sense of alertness for a lot of it. I got to fire disposable rocket launcher 66 at some Taliban dudes. Got to clear a bunker. One of the guys called in, one of the JTACs called in a thermobaric Hellfire missile from a helicopter and killed 16 Taliban in one cave. It was a pretty sporty day. And then we ended up raiding. It was just me and my team leader at like the last hours of the morning as the sun was going to rise, and he spotted like a Taliban under. We stretched so thin over this campaign terrain that it was just me and him, and like two militia guys that were with us, and ended up doing this like morning raid with just the two of us and the militia on this
So
this
four
compound.
guys, basically.
Yeah, 4 guys, and 2 of them really just kind of like
Support.
so, yeah, kind of support, kind of, and you're not really sure if they're actually going to light you up or purposely, or the militia were good. The militia were better than the A&A. They were militia. They were on a shirt. They knew who their enemy was, so they were like, they're the ones you want next to you. I was interested that the paid guys were like, I'm pretty sure half Taliban, half National Army. So anyway, we ended up raiding this whole compound, catching a whole bunch of Taliban dudes in there that just none of them had their firearms on them. It turns out they'd cased them because we were coming through town, and this had now been known for over 24 hours. So they were like, they don't want to be seen trying to flee the area. They were like in a quagmire. So those guys got caught. But a lot of these, when I was taking like 10-minute naps, one in the middle of the night and then one at like 5 a.m. in the morning. And I just remember that there was a high probability of getting grenaded in my sleep. Like if there was ever a chance of being, it was like the chance of being grenaded in the sleep. But we'd been up so long that it was starting to verge on like your cognitive impairment if you didn't try to grab the slightest nap, like the risk to reward.
Is there any drug use in those circumstances? Like I'm talking about like prescription drugs like Provigil and modafinil, or any stimulant drugs to keep you awake and keep you alert, or no?
No.
Why not?
Didn't even have a coffee. Again, the military is like
super strict.
They're so strict, like in the sense of like almost definitely to a fault, right? Like Christ, man, like you've got the biggest numbers of guys who have psychological issues when they get out of any workforce ever and suicide rate by maybe tenfold. Probably not a terrible idea to start considering these psychedelics they're using in clinical environments and introducing them in clinical environments.
Even during the missions, like they're happy to prescribe Adderall and Ritalin and stimulant drugs to like children with ADHD, but the special forces guy who hasn't slept for 28 hours and he might die if he's napping. Let's not give it to him. Like I'm not a proponent of, don't get me wrong, I'm not a proponent of drug use, but I couldn't think of a better time to have a stimulant.
Me too.
To help you.
Me too. I couldn't think of a better time to have peptides and other regenerative medicines when I finished selection. Like we were fucked, like proper physically just depleted bodies, right? So then when it comes to these missions, it's like absolutely like, give me Ritalin. Give me a shit ton of Ritalin. But no, you won't you won't. No one will give it to you. You won't get it. Which, now when I go out at night, I wouldn't even go out without I take a coffee after dinner if I'm going to stay out for another couple of hours.
Yeah, I do
And
the same thing.
I don't drink that much coffee. Like I had one here this morning. It's a Turkish coffee. It's not that strong. I usually drink decaf, but at dinner, I'll drink a full strength coffee and or when I change time zones and use that as a force multiplier for my ability to stay alert and to enjoy the evening. And I didn't have coffee on that journey. Now, don't get me wrong, like the military has replaced a lot of that with Red Bulls and all these pre-workout powders and all this stuff, but wasn't exactly taking that on the mission. It's like really my mission equipment for food was I'm a fucking savage that can push through anything. And I would take 2 protein bars that would be in my left pocket. And then whatever I ate out there, I ate otherwise. If I was going out for over 24 hours, definitely, I might take a small ration pack meal, but that you can add some water to and it'll go from dehydration. You just eat it and you're done. But other than that, I wasn't taking much food. I knew I could survive for 5 days and push like a savage, but in the interest of cognitive ability, like in a war, I'm not looking for to be able to perform for 5 days, like on selection and just exhaust and beat and still get it done. I want to be alert. Like, remember, I'm not just the operator on the ground. I'm also in charge of the communications for the team and across the whole valley of communicating with all the other forces.
You need to be sharp.
I am also in charge of deconflicting the airspace with these forces. So it's like and usually the person who deconflicts the airspace, the JTAC, is a single-handed job. My last trip to Afghan, I was the dog TAC. I was a dog, Special Operations Combat Assault Dog Handler, and I was a JTAC, the Joint Terminal Attack Control. So it was like deconfliction of all airspace, whether it was artillery or mortar rounds flying through the sky, attack helicopters, transport helicopters, jets dropping bombs, planes dropping munitions, and drones and spy planes and all this shit that was stacked at various heights over the battle space in order to give us complete observation and everything and whatnot. So it's like most of the toys I carried on that mission was an entire sack of different equipment to coordinate aircraft as strategically as possible to drop bombs on the right target. And the intricacies of that job is usually a one-man job, and the people that they choose for those jobs are usually already people that are like navigators or fighter pilots or helicopter attack helicopter pilots or whatever. And they do that as one job. I'm trying to do that whilst I'm clearing buildings simultaneously. I'm having radio communications with aircraft that are stacked in the airspace whilst I am clearing a compound with my team members, because there's only like 5 or 6 of us. Yeah, it was a lot. Like, so you'd say, yeah, hell yeah, it's in my interest to have my cognitive ability as sharp as possible and to give me those drugs. But then again, the reason I mentioned the psychedelics is because we know that those drugs cause psychological problems. You're buying time. Any pharmaceutical, you're basically buying time. I don't care what you're taking. You're choosing to put out this fire, and you're creating 3 more problems somewhere else. And the reason I mentioned the psychedelic part is because it's like, well, guys probably need some of this shit, and they're probably afraid for putting fuel on the fire with these with Ritalin because of the ridiculous rate of mental health challenges that people have when they get out. That maybe some preventative medicines may be the way to go. That let's do some of these groundbreaking psychological treatments that now it's so out there that they're successful, infinitely successful, that let's take some of these and let's start preventatively combating the future problems that all these soldiers seem to have.
Absolutely.
Doing what we consider normal.
Absolutely.
Yeah. As it comes to fear, was I afraid? I did think of something the other day where I think um there was an element of fear. I can't remember what it was though. It was like I went through this work with it with like a very intensely guided meditation from this guy I'd been working with, and it took me months to get there. And I had this release of what I never allowed myself to feel fear
Mm.
until like 7 months ago. Was the first time I'd ever allowed myself to feel it. It was emotion I turned off completely. So let's say, I did compound the feeling of fear, but it was a delayed onset to I'll deal with that later. So that what I
Makes
did
sense.
feel, what I did feel was an extremely heightened sense of alertness in a lot of situations when rounds were cracking past my head.
Yeah. I guess from a survival perspective, it's like fear is only going to make me perform worse right now. So I don't have the luxury of that choice.
Yeah,
I need to act.
yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah.
I've got one last question,
Mm.
and this is a deep one. I've saved the deepest one to last. Someone
Let's go.
commented, they said, I really enjoyed the interview, but I really wanted to hear some more findings of his journey through the Bible from one former serviceman to another. Though I was nowhere near SOF, Jesus and my little Bible were my rock during many cold nights, and there is undoubtedly a spiritual component to warfare that gets
Mm.
overlooked. Being tasked to kill another group of people is something that has serious spiritual effect on us and darkens the soul. Glad that this is being looked at in a podcast. I know you've read the Bible recently, the last
Mm.
couple of years. You've read it from cover to cover. Um, would you call yourself a Christian? Do you think
I would now. I for sure
Yep.
would now. And it's so interesting, man, the parallels that I've gone down because I've done all the indigenous medicines. I've done the North American and the South American ones from the Amazon,
Mm,
and I've engaged with those communities first. Like you couldn't have convinced me to believe in God
mm,
after my time in service. That you couldn't have done it. Not a single person could have done it. It wasn't until during some particular ayahuasca ceremonies, which I'm gonna be honest, like if you haven't done it, it's like it's realer than this world. And once you've
mm,
been there, you're like, oh, fuck. Um, it's realer than whatever this clown world is, right? And in that sphere, there, it's like I had a moment where I got on like my sixth ceremony, I got a glimpse of God. I actually
mm,
just kind of surrendered. I'm like, right, either this is going to happen or I'm gonna die trying, come what may. And I just surrendered and laid back, and I'm like, I die. But today I do this, and
mm,
God showed up. The presence of God showed up, and unquestionably, it was not, oh, was that this? Was this? It was like, okay, fuck. Because before that, you could not have convinced me that God exists with the shit that I'd seen. It was just like not possible. Um, and you need to change, if you can't concept God, you need to change your understanding of what you think God is. Um, and that's a good start point, right? But getting a trunk or a war chest, putting a padlock on it, sitting on it, and refusing to ever look inside of it isn't acknowledging that God isn't saying that God doesn't exist. It's you voluntarily being ignorant to even look into the trunk because you're scared to look into the trunk. So getting onto the Christian subject, I started there on my journey. And once I went down that rabbit hole and understood the indigenous connection to the grand spirit, like the great spirit, um, I was able to go further down their relationship with God, and then see in Brazil in particular, and the Christians in Colombia that would include it as part of their Christian ceremonies in Brazil in particular. But it was wild, like the presence of the Archangel Michael and of Jesus and Mary are on the altar of the shamans. which was really interesting to see that overlap. So it's like, okay, it's like, I don't know anything about Jesus Christ, so I'm just going to not go down that rabbit hole. I'm just going to start with this God concept. And I went down that to such a degree until I'd really done some intense healing and spiritual healing, which is like, I guess on the we've got 3-dimensional world, and you've got like 4D is kind of like the time space spectrum, and then you've got like 5D dimensional, which would be like that spiritual journey within yourself. And if you meditate every day, you do these medicines and whatnot, you see that world. Like ayahuasca is a hack to seeing that world, right? Like it really will take you deep inside of it almost relatively immediately. And you go inside of that spiritual world and deep within yourself, and you can't unsee the things you see, right? And you're like, oh, all right, well, that's a thing. I eventually got a pretty lengthy connection, almost like a conversation with God that was unquestionable. And I tested it. It was a really interesting test where I was asking questions, and they were being answered faster than I could cognitively answer them, like myself. And also they were saying information that was so new to me that I couldn't have created it and it was too damn accurate. So once that happened in the initial 10 minutes of this weird connection and conversation with God, I just stopped trying to challenge it and just shut the fuck up in humility, and just listened to what was being said. Anyway, so that started my connection to God. And then I'd always had a very dear mentor and friend of mine that just has 5 kids, beautiful kids, and apples don't fall far from the tree. So they were all, their lives were in order. They were happy. They had healthy relationships. His wife was just great, and he just had his shit together, right? And he was always like, he was really Christian. He taught himself Aramaic, read the whole Bible in Aramaic, went to the Middle East, and went to every single site to, without aggressively doing it, kind of like, yeah, I'm just going to go disprove the Bible to myself. And when he got there, he went to so many sites and joined so many dots. And then he goes, I was doing it, and one day I was just there, and I was at this site, and he's in Jordan, and he goes, holy shit, God's real. He's like, fuck. And he's like, it was like a Sudoku puzzle. He goes, that was him working that out. And he is such a brilliant man. He's a dear friend, him and his wife, and probably about 25 years older than me. Such a brilliant, remarkable man that it was like hard to fathom that this extremely competent, intelligent businessman and member of society could fathom this, go down that road. So anyway, he was always like, Nick, one day you'll pick up the Bible and you'll check it out. And anyway, so like all things I've done at this point, I've done the North America, South America. I've gone to Nepal and India on a little bit of a pilgrimage with a dear friend of mine who literally adopts orphanages. He takes on orphanages. He has no idea how he's going to pay them month to month, but he finds out a way to do it. And he's a spiritual leader over there. He accidentally understudied a master healer for 10 years, kind of as his guru, trying to question critical thinking and question to prove everything he was doing. But he just kept sending miracle kind of after miracle to such a degree that they ended up, just in that 10 years he was with him, they saved 1.3 million people who were destitute, like from comas, and brought women out of menopause to have kids and all that, like just like it was a Tuesday. I've seen a couple hundred people a day in their clinics, up to 600. He's taken on 4,000 orphans, right, to make sure every month that he clothes, feeds, and houses these orphans in their institutions, and financially covers it. However the hell he does it, he doesn't know. He just leaves it at the hands of God. So I saw that connection to God, and I watched that. So then when I kind of come back and sounded from all of this, I'm like, all right, well, it's time. I just pick up the Bible and started reading. And the Old Testament is a slog, right? And that, the first chapter in the beginning, and going through all that was interesting, and it starts getting to some pretty heavy Jewish history shit, where they, there was a lot of like what you would now look at, and it's probably still back then as well. Like there was a lot of killing, for the fight for the land, right? And you go through all that, you go through the accountability of like, if you've got to lose me ever in the Old Testament, it was numbers. Numbers was brutal. Yeah. Like it was like, my God, it was like, what am I doing, man? But I read every single word and page because I'm like, I'm going to read this whole, I'm going to read it whole. And eventually you do go through some beautiful journeys and some stories and some metaphors and parables and all these things, but there's this thing that happens and you start getting to Jesus. And what I was doing was I simultaneously do things, right? So when I journal across different spectrums, but I journal in a foreign language every time. I never journal in English. I change every day. So that one of the other languages, so that I can enhance that language's reading and writing skills. Double hack, right? Well, I do the same thing when I'm reading out the Bible. I practice my general American and British accent when I was reading out the New Testament. So I read the whole New Testament out loud.
Wow.
And when I read it out loud, there was this really weird thing that it kind of invoked in me, and it was ever so subtle until I got to the end. And when I got to the end, I dedicated the last chapter to read on one whole day, and I sat there and I read the whole thing out loud, and I read it, and then I went into this deep meditation where I had the presence of God and Jesus turn up. Like it was a psychedelic meditation, and it was intense. And after that, it was like pretty hard to deny the existence of Jesus Christ and the continuation. And as I just randomly pick up books now, like this one, serendipitously, actually John Voight, the actor, gave me this one. So the autobiography of a yogi. Actually, I was wondering why he was reading it, right? Because he's a very calm, godly man. Like he's extremely, godly and connected. But I got him to write in the front here a little note about it, because I'd seen him with this book so much. He's like, I used to be an arsehole. I used to be a typical Hollywood party boy, an arsehole. I was rude to people. I didn't have time for people. I didn't have the way I'd interact with people and party and expect the world and treat girls and all this shit. And he was just like, he goes, until I read this book, and now I carry it everywhere with me. Well, this book here is interesting at the overlaps of the way the Hindus see Jesus, because he's mentioned a lot in here, and God, and the way they have their own gurus and people in these energy wavelengths throughout history. So to come full circle back to the start of this conversation, how do I tie this into the heaviness of war and whatnot? Well, I've gone through this heavy, and it's ongoing, right? I intend to be on this spiritual journey and understanding more forever, the rest of my life, and always taking on the next step. Like and so far to date, the ayahuasca is where I really wrestled with the people the men that I killed, and the death that I saw. That one was pretty intense. And then it happened actually again when I took ketamine and mushrooms together for the first time in a ceremony. And that there gave me full flashbacks and a process there. I didn't even know mixing them together was a thing until I'd kind of had explained. And then as a result of that, I went through all the full flashbacks and went through the proper grieving for everyone that I saw die, and I'd never done. So again, when I'm ready, these things, God shows up and they will manifest in their own way. I don't fight them anymore. I don't resist them. I don't try to force my life and my path in capacity. I just have sort of an extreme amount of faith now in whatever journey I'm meant to be on. I'm on, and I follow like the breadcrumbs of God. So I did that, right? And I've gone through that healing, and to be honest, it's really weird because a couple of I wear my cross that I bought. I bought at the Vatican, randomly called to it. It's the simplest, most basic wooden cross there, right? On purpose. And I got this at the Vatican in 2018 or 19, probably 19. I just gone over to Rome. My dear friend of mine is a prince, and he brought me into his knight's order in conjunction with the Vatican in Rome. And I just felt some really powerful presence there of that, of God in this ceremony in this church. And I just felt like buying it, and I wasn't Christian, and I wouldn't say deeply of any capacity felt the presence or thought about God at all at that time, and I just got it. And I have no idea why I got it, none. And I couldn't join the dots until probably a couple of months ago of why, maybe 2 or 3 months ago, why I'd actually, till I did that meditation that I told you about at the end of the Bible. Like, it was overpowering, like a psychedelic journey, basically, from sitting there, finishing the Bible and sitting there with it. It was intense. And so yeah, I've become a Christian, and I constantly looking at new ways to look at Christianity. Like, this is basically Hindu text to a degree. And this one actually helps me make way more sense of Christianity than the Bible does, per se. This helps kind of explain how a lot of these things tie together. But I've done an intense amount of work, and I'll let you know what the next phase is, which I just volunteered last night.
I have an idea for us. we need to meet again in Macedonia.
Go on a pilgrimage.
There is a monastery that I went to when we were there. It's called Bigorski Monastery, the monastery of John the Baptist. And John the Baptist is obviously the first martyr in Christianity. Like, he'd given up his life for his faith. This monastery is about 1,500 years old, or maybe 1,100, like around. It's really old, very, very old. And it's about 1,800 square meters above sea level. And you have people who go there who commit their life to a monastic life, like monks. They give up everything else and they live in a monastery. But what they also have is they have people from all over Europe. And I mean, I met a guy there from Africa. I met 2 guys there from Finland. I met people from all over the world that go there, that stay in the monastery as an act of healing. Many of them had struggled with, like, one guy struggled with depression. Another guy had substance abuse problems. The guys go there, and no substances are being used, mind you. It's all just prayer, liturgy, worship, education. And I would very much like one of these monasteries, any of the kind of more Eastern Orthodox old monasteries, you'll find, look, everyone's a little bit different in their faith. In Eastern Orthodoxy, I think has like it has the rituals and the traditions and the incense and the prostrating and the Bible and the prayer. It has almost everything. So much of Christianity now, especially like in the Western, more modern version of Christianity, many people don't know. Like, I was driving past a billboard here in Sydney, and I saw a billboard, and it said, "Did you know that Jesus prostrated? FindIslam.com." And I was like, well, actually, Christians prostrated. Like, we have been fasting and prostrating and using incense and wearing headscarves and doing these things as part of the faith for much before any other faith.
The ergot I spoke of, the ergot was found at Christian cauldrons. That's why the Vatican. That's why they're at the Vatican, swabbing early Christian cauldrons until it was banned by the Catholic Church.
There are many books that I have started to read outside of the Bible, kind of prescribed to me by friends who are in the faith, of the early church fathers. There's a book called Passions and Virtues, which I'll send you a copy. There's many like really, really good books, and it reminds me of, I actually read it and I remembered you because I remember you telling me about As a Man Thinketh, and I thought all these books that we have been reading, if you go back far enough, they're all virtues from Christianity. Like the first virtue that the church considers, or the Christians consider, the highest virtue is humility. And the kind of the most dangerous kind of thing to have is pride. Too much pride, not enough humility. And because
that's the
humility,
ego. That's what they talk about with all the indigenous medicines that seems to be overlapping.
The more I look, the more I'm like, oh, this is what New Age spirituality kind of is. It's saying the same thing, except it's reworded, repackaged in a different way. But yeah, I mean, I love it because now we can share, because I'm learning. I'm on the process of learning. Like, we're going to have Father Josiah Trenham on the podcast. I went to see him live. I want to interview him. I'm learning constantly about the best way. And like, I do it every day. Like, I bought a prayer rope for myself from somebody in Ukraine who's on Etsy selling prayer ropes as a way to raise money for the victims of the war. And I was like, well, I want a prayer rope to say the Jesus prayer. And the Jesus prayer, because I don't know I'm not a very good at prayer. I can't free pray. I'm not the best at it. So I need structure. And the Jesus prayer is essentially, Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me, a sinner. That's it. And you just say it over and over and over and over again. And it's a complete prayer because you're submitting, Lord Jesus Christ, you're the Lord, Son of God. So you're accepting kind of the dual nature of Jesus. Have mercy on me, right? Like, it's humility. Have mercy on me. I'm a sinner. And that's
The
us.
interesting part is that the original Aramaic,
Mhm.
when you read the Bible, there's go online and find the hack that'll tell you like what words have been misconstrued over their translation to English.
Absolutely.
Because they've changed from Aramaic to like Greek to Latin to French and whatnot, and then eventually got into English, which is a mutt of multiple languages. So sin actually means just to miss the mark. It's not to spite
Yeah, it's
yourself,
to
hate
miss the mark.
yourself.
Correct. Yeah.
I just missed the mark.
But what is the mark? Right. And so this is where, like, in many of these, like in many of the older churches, like in Catholicism and Orthodoxy, you have these sacraments that you continually do. So the first sacrament being baptism, right? So you become baptized to join in communion with Christ, so that
Mm.
then you can take part in the other sacraments, such as confession, repentance, anointment of the sick. Marriage is a sacrament. So, like, I remember speaking to my priest, and I said, "Hey, I was baptized when I was young. I was born Orthodox. However, I feel like for many years, like up until now in my life, I was never really involved in the faith, and I want to come. I kind of want to come back. Do I get baptized again?" And he explained it to me really well. He said, "No." He goes, "Christianity is kind of like a sailing ship throughout time. You came on the ship when you were baptized, and you've left the ship. However, you can come back, but you don't need to be rebaptized again. You need to repent. You need to confess. You need to take part in the sacraments and take part in the liturgy and come and get communion." Like these, I realize that the Christian life, like how the old church, kind of the traditions of the Christian life, are there to keep you on the journey. It's continual renewal. So every Sunday when you go to liturgy and you pray with the priest, and then you get your communion, and then you fast, and then what does fasting do? Well, sometimes it makes you feel a little bit less energetic. So what disappears when you're less energetic? Your pride. You don't feel so proud, do you? Now you kind of like have less energy to be angry, and energy. You kind of deal with things with a little bit more humility. So it's really interesting, man. Like I've learned so much, and like it's a daily challenge. Like every morning I wake up, and I've realized that the world is a spiritual battle. Every morning I wake up, and something is tempting me, whether it's the devil or Satan or whatever, but something is tempting me to either look at something hateful online, or get angry at someone, or rush to my appointment, or ignore somebody that I love, or whatever, watch porn, like whatever it is. Like the world's constantly tempting you, and it's a
Yeah,
battle to always stay on the path.
it's really interesting that if I go to the Christianity, like, and you're talking about the modern, let's say wokeness. Well, no, it's not even say wokeness. Let's say like the woo-woo kind of more world. Let's say like modern spiritualism. It is just using a different language to describe the exact same thing.
Yeah.
Basically, I've drawn every single parallel, and I have a men's group I run out of the States with, and it's international, and do work with them. It's like I do, one-to-one work with guys, and I also do we do groups, because men's community is really powerful. And we go through all this in there and watch everyone sort of go on their own spiritual journey, right? And one thing that they called in there, and like is the governor. It's like this thing that's kind of like trying to steer you towards maybe I'll sleep in today. Oh, maybe I'll just watch porn. Oh, maybe I'll just masturbate. Oh, maybe I'll have those extra drinks. And it doesn't have to be this grotesque thing, right? Like epic thing. But there's this mind in you that's trying to convince you to be less than everything you could be, than who you are. And it's not like, it's nothing to sit like, it's not like people associate the devil with, oh, the devil turned up and convinced him to kill or betray this person, like major acts of destruction. But it's actually the little things. And one thing I got at the end of the Bible, which just came to me at the end of that meditation, was these hands are for the work of God, and the devil is not welcome here. And I got to be honest, since the day I decided that, verbalized it out loud in that meditation, people go, oh, you have your ups and downs. I'm like, I'm waiting for it. I don't really have downs anymore. I've taken complete ownership and responsibility for every single facet of my life, every one of them to the minorest degree, in line with just following the breadcrumbs of God, the right thing, without fighting it. And as a result of that, I don't have bad times. I don't have the down times as such anymore. My life is fucking great. As great as it could be. I'm the healthiest I've ever been. And I can attest it to the not listening to this governor that or the devil. And I've associated it as it's synonymous as the devil, actually. I'm like, oh, that's just that little conversation trying to convince you to not to sin, and in the light of the word that I say, which is this, to miss the mark, to, yeah, you know what, it's gonna be okay. But it's like, but there's also like direct, I like to correlate the porn one, right? Because porn does the same reaction in your brain as cocaine or any major heroin and any other major drug, like that is hyper addictive and destroying. And as you can look at the brain on those drugs, and it's the same as on porn, right? So you got that really messes things up. So you take away the Christianity out of this, and you know, the science side of it is saying it's destroying you, right? But then if you and then you could take away all the Christianity and still look at things as doing the like not listening to the governor per se. And you could go down the road of not listening to the governor, what we use in our community. It's like this governor that's trying to tell you how to do things and live your life, and choose the easy path and not go outside and do that workout, and not do that workout in the rain because you've got a goal or something bigger than yourself you want to be a part of. To circle back to the start here, to not go out and do that, to lay in bed, to choose the easy road, to do this, right? I look at porn, and then I look at masturbation. Like, there's no positive to masturbation, right? As a man, like, you stack testosterone in your body if you don't masturbate. In fact, your body starts doing what it's naturally meant to do. You basically, you weaken yourself by masturbating, right? Like, if that's not known to anyone who's listening here, go down that rabbit hole. It's pretty obvious. And so you give it 3 days. By about the 3-day mark, you'll start feeling stronger. You'll start feeling mental clarity. You'll start feeling sharper. Your body will start using that testosterone in your system to heal, to regenerate, to provide strength. You'll be better in the gym. You'll be better clarity. You'll communicate to women better. You'll have healthier relationships. You'll be more stable. You'll have more homeostasis, and you'll actually look more handsome and more athletic. And as a result, and the reason for that is because when your body doesn't think it's competing in the gene pool, it's like it starts dumping more hormones to start like making you look and perform better so that you can compete in the gene pool. But you're basically just, you know, anyway, that's like a side note there for the journey of
I think
masturbation.
even with porn, and this is a question that I'm going to ask the priest. Like it's I mean, obviously lust is one of the sins. But also, like, the woman you were watching is somebody's daughter, somebody's wife, somebody's sister, somebody's, you know, and she likely is in that situation because she herself is a sinner struggling with something. So when you start to view the people around you as your brothers and sisters in Christ, you start to treat them a little bit differently. Instead of, you know, I find like the closer I stay to God, the more patience and grace I have for other people. Like in the last church liturgy I went to, the priest kind of spoke about, you know, saying, you know, when we do something wrong, we tend to come up with reasons for ourselves as to why we did it and justifications. But when your brother and sister in Christ do it, you tend to judge them. Why not give them the same reasons and justifications? hey, maybe that person is just having a really difficult time. Like, actually, a movie that you should watch is called Man of God. It's about the last person, I believe this is the last person who has been sainted by the church, like
Hmm.
ordained as a saint. And he's from Greece, and he started this monastery. And there's a scene in the movie where somebody gets really angry with him and like shoves these books at him, and he gets really upset. And then he realizes what he's done, and he says, I'm sorry, Father. Like, I'm sorry for getting angry. He goes, no, I'm sorry for making you angry. And you think like that amount of like grace and patience, I have only ever experienced with like that true grace, people from God, like people, yeah, of God.
I there's this beautiful overlap across all these spiritual realms that I visited of, kind of like love being the answer. And love doesn't mean necessarily you take shit, right? You got to stand up for yourself and to 100% stand up for yourself in every facet. And standing up actually looks like love looks a lot like integrity. Integrity, truth are all synonymous, which means that your words, thoughts, and actions are aligned. So speaking your truth when you're not happy or disagree with something before it turns into a full-blown argument or a confrontation. That's what most people do. They try to dance around never having a hard conversation. So when it comes out explosively. But if you speak up healthily at the right immediately as it's starting to arise, actually, that never becomes a big thing. It kind of gets kind of fizzles out pretty quickly and creates peace. But someone the other day goes to me, a guy that I take ayahuasca with, he's actually one of the employees in the company now, and he goes, I'm like, hey, dude, if you don't agree with someone else you're working with here or whatever, I'm like, if you agree, yeah, cool, I see, you're positive and upbeat, but if you don't, I'm like, don't get emotional about it. I'm like, mechanical, not emotional. He goes, yeah, but everything I've ever done in ayahuasca has kind of taught me to be myself and to be emotional. I'm like, yeah, cool. I'm like, well, in this place, it's like, until you work how to master love in like the universe and just greet everyone with this energetical frequency of love. And I'm not talking like, like you love your mother. There's a degree of love, right? Like fraction, until you meet them with any of that, whether you're wronged or righted or whatever, until you can do that, mechanical, not emotional. Because that's like that, and that's what I recommend for people with their children. Like, and I'm like, I'm not there yet. I'm like, I don't know when or if. It's a huge feat, and it's a really massive challenge to get to the point where you can meet everyone with love. That's like, it's quite the impossible challenge. And there's a lot of great Christians that lead by example in that realm, which I adore. And the Christianity traditionally cops a lot of shit. It's like it's become fashionable in the last years. Like you can shit on anything Christian, beat them up, call it bullshit, but do not touch Islam or do not touch Judaism. Well, it's like, well, either everything's touchable or nothing's touchable. But the Christians just meet it with love better,
Exactly.
I find.
And that's how you know
The
it's the
answer is
truth.
love. Yeah.
That's how I know it's the truth anyway. But my friend, we have to wrap it up.
Do it.
This has been awesome. Maybe we'll see
man.
how this video does, and if people have questions, we'll do part 3.
There we
But
go.
I will send you some recommendations, and let's keep this conversation going, and let's see
You
if
know,
we can do another
I want
pilgrimage.
to I want to say one thing on that. Well, actually, first I'm about to go do a Vipassana.
Okay.
A Vipassana, which is 10 days silent retreat. So I'll let you know what comes of that. I'm going to do that probably in December. So anytime after that, in January or whatever, we could have a chat about what comes up there in 10 days. You're not allowed to
Let's do
talk,
it.
communicate, and with anyone. So that could be an interesting, an interesting timing. And there was one thing on the comments I want to say, like, first time I ever read comments, right? And it was this really interesting journey where some of them were relatives, some of them, were a bit, might have been like from a more shallow or surface level place, and that was interesting as well. But the one that stuck with me, and this is what I've learned: when you get this discomfort feeling in your chest, that's usually like, I call that the breadcrumb of God. Like if you see this beautiful girl across the room in the gym that you're like, oh, I don't want to bother her. She's busy working out, or in a cafe or whatever, or like where people used to meet normal people, not shit faced at a bar, like, and you have to go up and be like, hey, you just be like, start a conversation with someone, right? you see that feeling that comes up, or you want to ask your boss for a raise, or you want to take on this next challenge or something in life, but you're a bit nervous, and that's the breadcrumb of God. That'll lead you on a better path. And one person in there, the comment you didn't mention was like, well, he says fucking a lot.
And I thought about mentioning this one, and yeah, I purposely didn't, but yeah.
He says fucking a lot, and this is, I think that's now twice I've used it in two sentences apart. Now, I actually taught myself not to a long time ago, because in America, it's like when I first went to live there, when I learned how to say water, I did that, and I did that. I learned to get rid of it because Americans don't swear and whatnot. When I talk to my fellow countrymen, I actually found it disingenuous not to swear. So I re-added it back into my vocabulary when talking to Australians and putting out things out there, because I kind of liked it as being a sign of imperfection. But what this person did with the comments was it created this like friction in myself about that. And I actually was able to follow one of those breadcrumbs of God. And it was a really good indication of actually, oh, you've gone completely rogue and reckless on to the other degree of that. You swearing a lot now. This isn't just like, the comedian using it once in his entire set for hitting the right altitude of a joke to emphasize it. This is now that you've gone off that. So that little frustration that I felt with that, I was able to follow down the rabbit's hole and to the betterment of myself.
So, I think that gentleman or woman, whoever wrote that, had good intentions.
Perhaps not, but it doesn't matter. I meet it with the same energy and frequency that I meet all other introspection. That's it. So throw in comments. Go for it.
Awesome. My friend. Till next time.
Brother, God bless.
See you soon. God bless. Bye-bye.
Ciao.